I've always had an issue with self-help books. It started when I first picked up The Secret. Basically, the message of the book was that if you visualize what you want in life, whether it's money, success, or health, you're more likely to get it. Now, this book has been sold over 19 million times. And yet, as I've said in a previous video, the process of visualizing actually hurts your chance of success. For example, researchers looked at students who had a crush on another classmate. Turns out, the more you fantasize and dream up romantic situations in your head, the less likely you were to tell your crush you like them. The same thing happens with career success. A lot of people fantasize about getting their dream job, right? But those that frequently do this submit fewer job applications, get less job offers, and have a lower income. Now, it's not just self-help books. You're handed advice everywhere you go, from friends to families to strangers. And yet, experiments show that many of these advices are actually harmful to you. So, to stop you from wasting time on advice that doesn't even work, here are the most common self-help myths. Number 1. Try not to think about it. Have you ever had something horrible happen to you, and when you tell a friend, they say, try not to think about it? Well, psychology has long known that suppressing thoughts tends to backfire. For instance, one experiment had participants describe the most upsetting thought they had about themselves. Maybe it was I'm worthless or that I haven't done anything with my life. Then, for 11 days, half of them were told to push this thought out of their minds. The other half were simply told to carry on as usual. Turns out, those that suppressed their thoughts ended up being more anxious, more depressed, and had lower self-esteem. Ironically, whatever you try not to think of ends up haunting you the most. The same thing happens to dieters. If you're told not to think about eating chocolate, you eat more of it. Or if you're a smoker and told not to think about smoking, you'll end up smoking more. So, instead of suppressing negative thoughts, you should just acknowledge that you have them. With time, these worrying thoughts will naturally run its course. Number 2. Self-affirmation. Another popular advice is that if you're feeling down, you should do a bit of self-affirmation. This is where all the quotes like, I am worthy of love, come from. Granted, there are studies that show that self-affirmation works, but there's a huge caveat. This will not work for people with low self-esteem, which is ironically those who are engaging in this practice the most. In fact, when people with low self-esteem focus on these self-affirming quotes, they end up feeling worse about themselves. Researchers suggest that when they see these overly positive statements, they just don't believe it. Consequently, this only ends up strengthening their negative self-view. Therefore, you should be very careful about using overly positive self-affirmation. And number 3, let your anger out. Everyone tells you that keeping your anger bottled up is bad for you. It's better to let it out in a safe way, for example, by yelling into a pillow. But the truth is, this advice also lacks scientific support. In one experiment, participants who let out their anger on a punching bag felt angrier than those who simply sat quietly in an empty room. They also acted more aggressively towards others afterwards. So, venting your anger can actually make you angrier. Now, that's not to say you should hold this anger inside you either. Instead, researchers show that it's better to let your anger out in a constructive way. This means discussing why you are angry as a way to resolve the situation. So, rather than punching a pillow, use your anger constructively. In the end, there's only a small percentage of advice that is worth taking. The rest, like the ones above, simply aren't true. Therefore, you should always remain skeptical. If you like the music in this video, you should definitely check out the musician's latest project. For more psych videos, click the subscribe button, and thanks for watching.